Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is gonna be my preview and prediction for Jarrell Miller versus Lenier Perot. And this is a fight that that it's going on this weekend and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And yes, it is getting taken place on it is getting taken place on Thursday on the 25th of April, which is going to be this Saturday and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And overall and stuff like that, this is a fight where I definitely cannot wait, to see this fight and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And I can't wait to really see Lenier Perot finally in a good fight too. Lenier Perot, you know what I mean? And that's the thing. And he's gonna have to fight his ass off, And the only fight I really remember of the only fight I really remember of Lenier Perot was when he fought against what's his name and shit like that, when he fought against Victor Faust and stuff like that, and when he fought against Victor Faust and stuff like that, it was honestly a really good fight. Honestly, it was back and forth, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Victor Faust and stuff like that, like he was hitting, like he was actually he was actually fighting very well against Lenier Perot. And in my opinion, I feel like, maybe I have to rewatch the fight, but I felt like, at the same time and stuff, like I felt like that Victor Faust looked a little bit more better, but it's just maybe I have to rewatch the fight and shit, and stuff, because more was giving it already to Lenier Perot, mainly because of the body work, and obviously shown in the fight where he stopped Victor Faust and stuff like that, you know what I mean? He stopped him with the body shot, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? It was a vicious body shot, and I think it broke his rib or whatever and shit like that, and that's why, and credit to Faust, because he didn't go down, but he was like, he felt it, he knew what was going on, and he was like, nah, I ain't like shit, I ain't fighting again, and that fight was a few years ago, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But yeah, I definitely remember that fight, and stuff like that. I wonder if it was in this house or if it was in the other house. I don't really know, and shit like that. I know I didn't cover the fight at all, and stuff like that. I really wish I did, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But both those fighters I didn't really know of. They weren't really that big of a name during the time, and Lenier Perot is still not as big of a name yet and stuff like that, And he gotta stay more active, man, and stuff like that, because I'm just saying. Actually, he stayed active and stuff like that, Linear Perot. Not much in 2024, and stuff like that, because he had two fights in 2023, which was the Victor Faust fight, and then he had another fight and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But then in 2024 he only had one fight, but then he had two fights last year in 2025. So with those two fights of last year, I mean, he stayed active, and shit like that, you know what I mean? But it just overall and stuff like that, I just feel like that he needs to stay more active and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, you know what I mean, and stuff, and that's the thing and shit like that, and that's the thing and stuff like that, you know what I mean, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But yeah, and shit like that. But he got to be able to do that, and stuff, or he got to be able to. But overall, I do feel like at the same time, I feel like after this fight with Jarrell Miller, I would like to see him have another fight, and stuff like that, Even possibly he could fight people like Terra Moana, if he gets through Jarrell Miller, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Because maybe a lot of these people aren't really familiar with Lenier Perot, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So that's also the big thing too. If Lenier is gonna want to win this fight, if it's a tough fight, I'm pretty sure they'll still give it to him too, and stuff like that, But I'm just saying and shit like that, but Jarrell Miller is going to be a really tough fight for him, and stuff like that. Somebody but it depends on what kind of Jarrell Miller we're going to get, though, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, because Jarrell Miller, like going on to it, Jarrell Miller, with Jarrell Miller and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, like, he can't be holding it like that, and shit like that, in this fight and stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's stuff like that, you know what I mean? It's stuff, it's like he can't be holding this fight and stuff like that, because it's like, hold on, guys. But then he can't be holding in this fight though, like how he was in the last fight against who did Jarrell Miller fight in his last fight? I forgot who he fought in his last fight. It was damn, I forgot who the hell did Jarrell Miller fight in his last fight? Let me look. Kingsley eBay was the fighter that Jarrell Miller fought, Kingsley eBay. And in his last fight with Kingsley eBay, he was doing nothing but a bunch of holding in that fight, though. Not gonna lie, though. eBay, he was doing a lot of holding, too. And stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. And early on, I mean, eBay was winning and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Until he just got gassed out and stuff like that, And then that's where Jarrell, and if you get gassed out against Jarrell Miller, it's just like, this is what I gotta say, because I don't even know if I'm really gonna be making another video with Kingsley eBay, unless if he has like a really good fight or some shit, and stuff like that. But Kingsley eBay has probably one of the worst cardio in the heavyweight boxing, because I am just saying, if you got gassed out by Jarrell Miller, like, I can understand this dude was laying all over him and stuff like that, but still, man, that's because he's getting tired, man. Because Jarrell Miller, even though with Jarrell Miller for his size, I mean, like, even though depending on fights, depending on who he's fighting, he'll get tired and stuff like that, you know what I mean? I mean, he fought pretty good against Andy Ruiz, and shit like that. I mean, he had a good gas tank against Andy Ruiz, in my opinion, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, I mean, that was a good fight with him and Andy Ruiz and stuff like that. But I don't know what the fuck that was when he fought Kingsley eBay, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying and stuff like that. Even though he's been staying active, he did get stopped by Daniel Dubois. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, and then, he had that draw against Andy Ruiz. And then had that fight against Kingsley eBay, and now he's having this fight against Lenier. So, I mean, this dude has been staying active, man. I will say that. I mean, Jarrell Miller, I mean, at the same time, I mean, he needs to start winning and stuff like that. I mean, that draw was good against Andy Ruiz and shit, but I'm just saying, but overall, back to Kingsley eBay, man, it's just, you can't be getting gassed out like that, man, and stuff like that. And that was almost like the same thing what happened when you fought Jared Anderson. You got knocked the fuck out by Jared Anderson, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Because he got tired and stuff like that, he was landing some punches like early on, but honestly, he was just getting whooped on the whole night by Jared Anderson, though, to be honest with you. But but it's just, I'm just saying and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I've seen him in fights where it's just, he would be winning, or let's say against Guido Vianello, when he fought Guido Vianello back in the day, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, like, he was winning that fight against Guido Vianello until he got tired. And that fight was a 6-rounder at that time, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that and Kingsley eBay, that dude gassed out within 3 rounds, I think it was, and stuff like that, It could have been 4 rounds, but I think it was like 3 rounds, and stuff like that, And that's where Guido Vianello basically just outboxed him, after that, and that's why it ended in a draw, and stuff like that, and especially in that fight when he was getting gassed out by Jarrell Miller, it's like, obviously, this dude could have moved this way, could have moved that way, bro, and even when he was punching Jarrell Miller, this dude was doing nothing nothing with those punches, but was just doing lazy, just slaps as hooks and stuff like that. Like he wasn't doing nothing to Jarrell Miller and stuff like that with those punches. I just don't know if he even takes boxing really seriously anymore. Even though I do think he could be not too bad of a fighter and stuff like that. Especially if he would have won that fight against Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that. Because he was doing good. It just this dude. Just once he was tired, it just all of his heart, all of his might, everything just went out the door, and stuff like that after that, you know what I mean? It just, his confidence level and stuff like that, just completely deteriorated, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so I'm just saying, man, and stuff like that, even though and shit like that, at the same time and shit, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Because even though and shit like that, at the same time and shit like that. Hold on, let me make sure. But even though and shit like that, you know what I mean, and stuff like at the same time. Wait, hold on, guys. And yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean. So it's just more of like, yeah, and it just overall in that fight, Kingsley eBay proved that he had terrible cardio, very basic. And shit like that, you know what I mean? Slow ass footwork, and stuff like that. Like this dude was getting bounced around by like what I want to say like that, and shit. I mean, like honestly, I mean, like Jarrell Miller was literally only like really fighting in the inside. Really, he wasn't really doing much besides that, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. But overall, moral of the story, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Kingsley eBay. It's just like, I'm not saying he can't bounce back or anything like that, but it just, that was rough right there, man. It just, you were winning and then bam. But I'm not saying he won't get any good fights and shit, I mean? Like shit, I mean, there's so many prospects right now, and stuff like that. I mean, he could get in there with anybody, but it just, if he wouldn't got in there with how much competitiveness is in the heavyweight division right now, like with Lenier Perot or fucking Moses Atama, Terbuana, all those guys, man. It's gonna be a rough night for him against any of those fighters, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And it proves even that Jarrell Miller was too much for him at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff. But yeah, more about Jarrell Miller and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. More about Jarrell Miller and stuff like that. You know what I mean? With Jarrell Miller and stuff like that. You know what I mean? He's a good fighter. And stuff like that. I mean, he's not that bad of a fighter and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. And overall and stuff like that. There was something. Oh yeah, more about that Andy Ruiz fight and stuff like that. When he fought against Andy Ruiz, that was a pretty good fight. Like when he fought against Andy Ruiz, and to have that close of a fight, and questionably, honestly, in some people's eyes, I mean, like even though in everybody's eyes, I mean that fight was an even Steven fight. Like that fight was very even, and stuff like that. Like it's really hard to kind of say of who won that fight, to be honest with you, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, but yeah, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Because when it comes down to it and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Because Andy Ruiz, he won the early part of the fight, you know what I mean? But honestly though, if you rewatch the fight, I wouldn't be shocked if you put a swing round in favor of Jarrell Miller, to be honest, because I feel like that Andy Ruiz kind of tired out like between like round 5 or some shit, and then that's where Jarrell Miller won like rounds, because I think he won more rounds than just from like round 7 and on. Like I think he won like round 6 and 7. So, and if that's the case, a scenario and shit like that, like he could have edged out a 7 rounds to 5 type of fight, like against Andy Ruiz. You know what I mean? Because he did box well. I mean, like even though he was boxing like kind of sloppy, but it just, But I mean, he was still hitting Andy Ruiz, you know what I mean? He was still boxing well and stuff like that, you know what I mean? He was still managing the distance, you know, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like what most black people do and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? But overall, like, he did really fucking good, bro. Like, I'm just saying, like, you know, like, Jarrell Miller, like, that dude did really good and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And, yeah, you know, and stuff like that, you know, so, I'm just saying, man, and stuff like that, you know, so, and overall, if he can impose that kind of heart in this fight, that's gonna be definitely very lovely, you know what I mean? But yeah, man, on to what these fighters need to do into winning this fight and stuff like that, you know what I mean? That's the thing and shit like that, you know, so like what these fighters need to do and stuff like that into winning this fight and stuff, you know, is that we're gonna start off with Lenier Perot. Because this is the fighter where I believe if you want me if I'm not mistaken and shit like that, this is my first fight promoting of Lenier Perot. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? So it's definitely a very big thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? You know, and stuff like that. You know, because you know it's been a while and shit like that. You know that I've promoted a fight I never promoted so this is the first fight, but at the same time I seen him fight before. He's a great fighter, you know, and stuff like that. Carries lots of power in both fucking hands. Literally, like, this dude has great power, man, and stuff like that. And it's not like he's a fighter where it's just like, even though he knows how to bounce, you know, and stuff like that, you know, and he knows that and shit like that, you know, but it just, this dude is just a powerhouse, man. It's just like, you don't want to get hit by him, bro, you know, and shit like that. Even though if you could get hit and you can handle his punches, and that's the thing, but I ain't gonna lie, with Cuban fighters, bro, they know how to. And he knows how to measure the distance and everything, but his main attribute is that power, man. Once he hits you right, bro, it like literally, man, and shit like that, you know. And he can really, and he has the power and the technique, you know, and the skills to knocking out Jarrell Miller like early if he wanted to and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, you know. But at the same time, this is a big test for Lenier Perot, you know, and stuff like that, you know, big dude. You know, Lenier Perot is also a big dude too. But if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that Jarrell Miller is the bigger fighter than Lenier Perot. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? But overall, Lenier Perot still got great skill, still knows how to dial up the distance. He still knows how to fight in he for surely knows how to fight in the inside, you know, and stuff like that. Quick hands, you know, with very quick hands, you know, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And you know, and he just has an elusive output, you know what I mean? Like, it just like, meaning like, it just like, you know, it just like, with his speed, he has an elusive output, meaning that like, he could throw a punch at any type of way of how he wants to. That motherfucker, it's not like he's super like athletic like that of how he just throws and everything. I mean, the dude is a heavyweight and shit, and it kind of is more kind of a flat-footed fighter, you know, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But it's just more of like, at the same time and stuff like that, you know, he still knows how to, what is it called and stuff like that. I'm trying to figure it out and stuff like that, you know, he still... But he still knows how to box well. You know what I mean? He still knows how to box well. He still knows how to get in the distance well. He still knows how to do all that very well. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? And overall, you know, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? I feel like, you know, when it comes down to Jarrell Miller, I feel like he has the right amount of footwork, the right amount of skill set, the right amount of reach to get into the distance of Jarrell Miller. He just has to utilize it. He just has to fight of how he fights. And that's the thing and stuff like that. You know what I mean? On to Jarrell Miller. What Jarrell Miller has to do into winning this fight is that Jarrell Miller has to, like, I would like to see Jarrell, like I don't mind when Jarrell Miller clinches, you know what I mean? Because this dude fucking walks around damn near at like 400 pounds, bro. Like, I can understand why this dude clinches, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And having to go all 12 rounds and shit, and shit like that, and then having to shed down that much weight and shit, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, like, that's a lot, because Jarrell Miller's a big dude, bro, and shit like that, like, he's a big dude, Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And he got some long arms, too. That's the one thing with Jarrell Miller, like, he might be a big dude, but he got some long arms, and he knows how to box, man, and that's the one thing with Jarrell Miller, he knows how to box, man, he don't got slow hands, he does got some quick hands, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, he got to show levels to Lenier Perot. He got to be able to show Lenier Perot and stuff like that, that he is the boss in the ring, you know what I mean? That he is the manager in the ring, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And he isn't going to be the one to boss him around and stuff, because obviously he has the more, like, fought Andy Ruiz, and stuff like that, had a draw, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Had, like, his only one and only loss was to Daniel Dubois, fought Daniel Dubois. Who else did he fight and stuff like that? There was, I wouldn't count Kingsley eBay at all, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But, let me check. He does have a little bit more experience, but not a lot more experience and shit like that, But still, at the same time, he still has more experience. And at the same time, when it comes down to being in the ring, he has more experience. And overall, this is a fight where he can definitely show Lenier Perot that he is the one that has the more experience. You know what I mean? And he's the one that's the top dog, and shit like that. And he's the one that's everybody's been overlooking, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, But he got to be in that mindset, you know what I mean? It just, he got to throw his punches, and shit like that. You got to use that jab, you got to crank that right hand and stuff like that, and that's the thing and shit like that, or like what is he, Southpaw Orthodox? Let me look. But Jarrell Miller is a right-handed Orthodox fighter and stuff like that, So what that means and stuff is that, like, overall and stuff like that, crank that right hand, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Measure the distance. That left hand can also do some damage, definitely knows how to do some damage, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But, use that right hand and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Give the power to Lenier Perot, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, But yeah, and stuff like that, and he got it, because he really got to give that power to Lenier Perot, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing. Box well, use the distance, use the clinches, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? When you're in the clinch, throw your more punches, don't use any much exchanges in the inside, because you're gonna get knocked out that way. Because I'm just saying, because this is a dude that really knows how to punch, bro. Like trust and believe, this dude knows how to punch. Like, I'm just saying, he knows how to punch Lenier Perot. Like, this dude definitely knows how to crack for sure, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, So, overall, he just got to be careful, and stuff like that, because because he got to just use the jab, use that right hand jab, and shit like that, use that right hand jab, and stuff like that, switch it. Switch it. Like, one thing that would be really good is where you can switch it to a right hook when you're in that kind of stance. And when you're in that kind of stance, because overall and stuff, because I mean, at the same time, it's like, with Lenier Perot, I believe he's a southpaw. Like, if you want me to be honest with you, I can look it up too. Yes, Lenier Perot, he is a southpaw. He's a stable southpaw. Basically a southpaw that, almost like Yermo Rigondeaux, where more kind of stationary, and stuff like that. I'm not saying he fights like Yermo Rigondeaux, but but like basically like more of like a flat-footed southpaw, instead like a stationary flat-foot southpaw, I would say, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. So he definitely is gonna show Jarrell Miller different looks. The high guard, he's gonna show him the Philly shell, and shit like that. You know what I mean? He's gonna show him different looks to sneak in punches, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? On Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that. So that's the thing and shit like that. So overall and stuff like that, that's the thing. So he'll be able to time it, but at the same time, Jarrell Miller, the one thing that he always does really well in fights is, and again, even where he did it against Andy Ruiz, and if you can do that against Andy Ruiz, you could do that in any type of fight, is where he does really good managing the distance with his long reach. Even if Perot wanted to counter, Jarrell Miller has the longer arms. You know what I mean? And he has power. And he could sit him down with the jab too if he wanted to. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. So he could just keep him there at bay. Bam, and shit like that with the overhand left, and stuff like that, and then come in with the right and stuff like that, and then after that, he clinches and he gets his punches in when he's in the clinch, and stuff like that, but overall when he's in the clinch, you gotta get his punches and clinch, Don't just lay on the dude. You gotta get your punches in and clinch, push this dude off of you, manage the distance with that jab, try to get the little snappiness going with that left hand, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. And basically, in that kind of standpoint and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I feel like that's what you gotta do, man. And shit like that. You have the IQ, you have the skills to beat anybody. You know what I mean? You could be able to beat Lenier Perot, you know what I mean? Like, you just gotta be in the right mindset, you just gotta utilize that kind of technique, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? You gotta utilize your like, you gotta utilize your experience, you gotta utilize, your higher ring IQ when it comes down to your size and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's thinking, bro, you know how to box really well for your size, man. Really, really well for your size. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? Jarrell Miller, and that's the thing, man, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But yeah, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But overall, that's the thing, man, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Because that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. You know what I mean? But that's the thing. But that's the thing and shit like that. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. But yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean? I think I got some in my eye or some shit. Hold it. But overall that's the thing, man, shit like that, but yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit, and stuff like that, and yeah, and stuff like that, but on to Lenier Perot more and stuff like that, you know what I mean? With Lenier Perot, and stuff like that, again, utilize your power and stuff like that. Do what you do and stuff like that, to boxing well, and stuff like that, But overall, I would like to see Perot be more coordinated in this fight and stuff like that, I mean, it's been a minute since I've seen him fight. I mean, he's already pretty fucking good, in my opinion. He already got speed, power, technique. It just, sometimes he doesn't always like to coordinate very well and shit like that. I mean, shit. I mean, it's not like Terrence Crawford always likes to coordinate always very well. Sometimes he just flails his punches, but it lands because he has the speed and power, and because he has the speed to landing and then the power to affecting, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying and stuff like that. That's something, I mean, I would definitely work on being more coordinated, and stuff like that in this fight, and stuff like that, again, and that's the thing and shit like that, But overall, work that body of Jarrell Miller. tear that body up. Because I'm just saying, because the reason why is because Jarrell Miller, he ain't gonna be staying at far distance all day. Like if he does that shit, he's gonna tire his ear. Like if you can manage to do that to keep him at distance, you could tire him out later in the rounds and just tear his body up there, and like that's where he could even get a later stoppage, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But tear that body up because Jarrell Miller is like. He's gonna want to clinch and stuff like that, When he's gonna be in the clinch, that's where you gotta really tear up that body, man. And stuff like that. You gotta really tear up that body, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, and yeah, and stuff like that, because even one punch is devastating, but throw more than that, because then if you throw body shots, that might even prevent Jarrell Miller to wanting to get into wanting to clinch. Now Jarrell Miller's wanting to just move around and shit, and stuff like that. A fucking damn near 400-pound fighter and shit, like, moving around and shit, like around the boxing ring that long for 12 rounds. I don't know about that, man, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so... I just feel like, in that kind of way, that's where, and he don't got the footwork speed. He don't got the speed of foot. He don't got, any speed with this footwork, Jarrell Miller, to getting away from Lenier Perot. So it's like, even if Jarrell Miller wanted to avoid a punch, he couldn't, especially if he's that fucking tired. And shit like that, he ain't gonna be avoiding any punches from Lenier Perot, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that. So that's just a walking punching bag that's just putting up a Philly shell, and stuff like that, putting up sometimes defensive moves, but it's a punching bag. So that's the thing and stuff like that, But yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean? But, my final prediction for this fight and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And stuff like that, I'm just gonna make it quick and simple. Well, let's try to make it quick and simple and stuff like that, But the early rounds and stuff like that, I do think that, overall and stuff, I do think that, overall, Jarrell Miller does do pretty good at utilizing the early rounds and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And sometimes with Lenier Perot, he sometimes can be more of a late starter, which sometimes I don't know how I could feel sometimes about late starting fighters, especially if you want to keep that undefeated record. Like, you always got to stay consistent from the opening bell, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, But overall, he sometimes can be more of a later starter, and stuff like that. Like maybe round 4, that's when he would start really throwing his punches, and stuff like that. I mean, late starting fighters can also be good. I mean, all fighters will stay undefeated, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit, and stuff like that, But yeah, and stuff like that, But in that kind of way of where I'm picturing it, I will say that the early rounds, I'm going to say that, I would say, I'm going to give it to Jarrell Miller. It could be a draw, but I would say it would end up being Jarrell Miller winning the early rounds. I'm going to say the mid rounds, though, that's where Lenier Perot is starting to figure out what he needs to do and stuff like that, He wins the mid rounds and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Later rounds, that's where, that's where Jarrell Miller is extremely exhausted from all the body shots that he's been taking from Perot, and shit like that. And Perot's been hitting the body since the opening bell, and he's really starting to feel those body shots, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, So now it's like he's starting to get really tired. Perot sees it, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And he's going for blood and shit like that, and he's throwing punches to the body and shit like that, throwing punches to the head, and then he hits him again to the head and stuff like that, Jarrell Miller's kind of starts stumbling and shit, and stuff like that, towards the ropes and stuff like that, and then he's curled up against the ropes and stuff. And then after that, that's where Lenier Perot throws a bunch of punches and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And then that's where he drops Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And he drops Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Jarrell Miller is definitely pretty hurt from those body shots, and stuff like that, still trying to get his mind right and stuff like that. But Perot is throwing so many dangerous punches and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And shit like that, and it's just, it just like, and he's getting his head knocked around. I'm predicting that his wig is going to get knocked off again, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? And he's going to get his head knocked around the ring, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? He's going to get hit by a really nice uppercut, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Down goes Jarrell Miller again, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And after that, and stuff like that, or it could, like, after that and stuff like that, that's where, like, I feel like the ref is still going to be giving Jarrell Miller some chances to getting up, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? Or it just is going to be a flail of punches and it's just going to be too much for the ref to but I'm going to say that overall he gets back up, he gets a chance, and then they get back to, in that, bam, right to the body and shit like that, you know what I mean? Lenier Perot, and then starts just doing the same shit that he's doing, and shit like that. Miller's trying to throw his punches, but it's not doing nothing. Lenier Perot's moving out of distance, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And he's throwing his punches and stuff like that, body, head, straight punches, dangerous punches, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And Jarrell Miller is just hurt. And that's where either the corner throws in the towel, or I would say that the ref stops the fight, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I would say within that one round, that's where I would see where Jarrell Miller is getting absolutely fucking just beat down. Like, getting knocked down, getting almost knocked down 4 times, but getting saved by the ref, and stuff like that, and stuff like that. But overall, my final prediction for this fight is that I got Lenier Perot stopping Jarrell Miller. I would say I got Lenier Perot stopping Jarrell Miller in, like, I would say, like, because that boy, Lenier Perot, knows how to punch, bro. Like, if you think that you could take a motherfucking, like, just watch, bro. Just watch. That's all I gotta say. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? I am just saying. And stuff like that. You know what I mean? But overall and stuff like that, like, the power, he got that dangerous power. I feel like it's gonna be too much for Jarrell Miller, and stuff like that, and I just feel like Lenier Perot is gonna win this fight, man. I just feel like that after this fight, he's gonna get himself a pretty good fight, but I wonder who he's gonna fight, though. There's a lot of good fighters out there in the heavyweight division. Could he fight, Tara Moana? Could he fight Moses Atama? Could he fight, like, the one thing with Daniel Dubois, it's just like, Daniel Dubois, like, be getting knocked out, you feel me? And it's just, even though Dubois is still a really good fighter and shit like that, you know what I mean? But it's just, at the same time, it's just like, what if he fought against this dude, Lenier Perot? Would he win? Or would he get totally just crushed? Like, I'm just saying, and stuff like that, because I'm just saying, bro, Lenier Perot does not get talked about at all, bro. Like, he's a really fucking good fighter, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? And yeah, and stuff like that, But overall, speed, power, youth, just different levels, I would say, would be this fight. and stuff like that, and that's why I have Lenier Perot stopping Jarrell Miller. I would say he stops Jarrell Miller, and I would say, what I say in the early part of I would say round. I ain't gonna lie though, like, I mean, at the same time, it's like, I'll give Jarrell Miller respect and stuff like that, that he does know how to take punches, but and shit like that. But it's gonna be around between round 8 and round 10, and stuff like that. Between round 8 and round 10, if I'm gonna say between round 8 and round 10, I'm gonna say that it's gonna be round. I think it's gonna be round. You know what? What's been screaming on my brain is round 10. I think that Lenier Perot is gonna get the stoppage against Jarrell Miller in the 10th round, and stuff. I mean, I think Lenier Perot is gonna get the stoppage against Jarrell Miller in the 10th round, in my opinion, out of the 12 rounds of the fight, and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And then the 10th round, that's where he just gets battered up, knocked down almost 4 times. They really could have stopped it early on, but it's just the ref just continues to allow the fight to go on, and shit like that, mainly because of how much of a high reputation that the Jarrell Miller has, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, so yeah, I mean, and shit like that. But overall, that's my final prediction for this video and stuff like that, for Jarrell Miller versus Lenier Perot, is that I got Lenier Perot defeating Jarrell Miller by a 10th round TKO. Thank y'all for watching this video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. I'm Preston. Peace out, y'all.